With Pastor Adam, and I am Adam, and I am pastor to believers and to doubters, to unfaithful Christians and to faithful atheists. And Jesus was not afraid of questions, and neither are we here at One Question with Pastor Adam. So we are going to talk about the questions. And hey, this is my first time going live on Instagram through this process of the podcast. So if you're watching on Instagram and you like this, say hi. Give me a shout out there. So we are live here on Fridays at 1 o'clock. Love the engagement that we have. So if you have comments or questions about the topic today or any Christian topic or religion topic, feel free to put those in the chat section. We have titled this episode, when this came across my mind, I was like, yes, that's what we're doing. How Bishop Budde exposed right-wing Christianity. I was going to say American Christianity, but American Christianity is much more diverse than that. Right-wing Christianity. So you have seen the video, I am sure, of Bishop Budde preaching at the prayer breakfast earlier this week and imploring for mercy. Kenton from Dallas, good to see you, my friend. Imploring for mercy from the president. And this has created quite the firestorm in the United States. And I thought it'd be interesting for us to talk about. So Cliff, welcome. Cheryl, welcome. And Princess, good to see you as well. I am going to read what Bishop Budde said. And if you have thoughts, comments on this, would love to see them in the chat section. Bishop Budde says this: "Let me make one final plea, Mr. President. Millions have put their trust in you. And as you told the nation yesterday, you have felt the providential hand of a loving God." That's beautiful. Like, Trump interprets being saved from the bullet shot as God's providential hand, and amen to that. If that's how he interprets it, that's what God is like. God is the one who is loving. And my view of God is not so much that God manipulates world events and things. We're responsible for them. But if somebody sees a loving God in the act of Trump not getting shot, all the beautiful, awesome. That's what God is like, not just for Trump, but for everybody, including undocumented immigrants, trans people. That's the kind of love that God gives to everyone. The Gospel of Luke, we're in the Gospel of Luke this year at the church. And in Luke chapter 6, Jesus says that you are to love your enemies. Why? Because that's what God does. God God is kind to the wicked and the ungrateful, I think is what it says in Luke chapter 6. That's God's love is for everybody, including those of us who think we're righteous and deserve it, and those who aren't, right? God's love is for everyone. And Cliff, acts of mercy. That's it. That's where this all stems from with Bishop Budde, is this loving God that is always coming at each and every one of us with the spirit of love. And so out of that, she says, "In the name of our God, I ask you to have mercy upon the people in our country who are scared now. They are gay, lesbian, transgender children in Democratic, Republican, and independent families, some who fear for their lives." Tragically, Trump, during his campaign, one of his major messages was Democrats are for them, not you, right? And the them there is a play on pronouns and our transgender siblings. So our transgender siblings have been scapegoated, and Trump has been one of the conduits for that scapegoating. There are other politicians who are doing that scapegoating as well to a minority group, our transgender siblings, who have very little, if any, political power, and yet they're being hatred is being channeled against them. Scapegoating is being channeled against them. So Bishop Budde here is calling for mercy. Now, we're going to get to this a little bit later, but this is perfectly in line what Bishop Budde here is doing with the biblical witness, with the prophets who rose up when political leaders forgot about their divine mandate, which is not to gain more power for themselves, but to help the poor and the marginalized. So Bishop Budde here is fully within the biblical witness when she asks for mercy for all people. And she goes on to say the people who pick our crops and clean our office buildings, who labor in poultry farms and meat packing plants, who wash the dishes after we eat in restaurants and work the night shifts in hospitals. They may not be citizens or have proper documentation, but the vast majority of immigrants are not criminals. And this is another place where Bishop Budde is standing up with the marginalized, because scapegoating our transgender siblings was one of the ways that he won, and also scapegoating undocumented immigrants who are routinely shown through studies to be actually not the ones that we should be afraid of committing crimes. Native born Americans are far more likely to commit crimes than our undocumented siblings, who are generally on their best behavior because they don't want to be sent away. They are generally productive members of their communities. That's what the studies show. That's what experience has shown me. And so this scapegoating of undocumented immigrants, uh, claiming that they're all criminals, and violent crime is on the rise when violent crime is at a record low for the last 30 years. You see, these are all lies that are being spread by the current president. And we have to wade through those lies, especially when those lies are meant to attack vulnerable, marginalized people. And that's what Bishop Budde is doing. So the other thing about this that is, I don't even know what the right word is, hypocritical. Uh, if you Google uh, Donald Trump and undocumented immigrants, you will find a Washington Post article that shows that Donald Trump was hiring undocumented immigrants to work at his own businesses, his golf courses, restaurants, casinos, hotels, while he was president during his last presidency, and not just at the beginning, but in 2019, like 3 years into it, near the end of his presidency, he was still hiring undocumented immigrants. You've seen farmers, I'm sure, say, yeah, we voted for Trump and we don't think he's being serious in trying to get rid of undocumented immigrants because our economy would just fall apart. So I don't know what he's going to do. I would suspect that he's going to feel a lot of pressure to make do on his promises, and how far he can get in that when it comes to our undocumented siblings. I don't know. I hope he doesn't get very far at all. So um, Bishop Budde here is asking for mercy. And uh, you may have thought that would not go well for her. I don't know, but it hasn't gone well for her. I mean, Trump comes back and attacks her and says the so-called bishop who spoke at the National Prayer Service on Tuesday morning was a radical left hardline Trump hater, calling for mercy for people who are vulnerable and being attacked makes you a Trump hater. Like, what world are we living in? This is crazy backwards. Um, like, she brought her church into the world of politics in a very ungracious way. I don't know how she could have been more gracious, unless she just failed to do her duty as a clergy person and avoided the topic of how our political leaders are scapegoating marginalized people. That would be that would be clergy malpractice in that scenario. She has to say something about protecting the most marginalized in our community, in our nation. It would be clergy malpractice not to. She was nasty in tone and not compelling or smart. She was very timid in tone. She was not nasty in tone. These are just the lies, the positioning that Trump is doing in order to channel hatred now against Bishop Budde. She failed to mention the large number of illegal immigrants that came into our country and killed people. Again, this this is scapegoating of our undocumented immigrants. Many were deposited from jails and mental institutions. It's a giant crime wave that is taking place in the USA. More lies from Trump. Chief critic, one of the chief critics after this is Representative Mike Collins from Georgia, who is a Methodist. He shared a clip on the sermon on Twitter and said the person giving this sermon should be added to the deportation list for preaching the gospel. I just want to give you a few biblical references here. The Bible is full of references about caring for the stranger in our midst, caring for the immigrant. In fact, in Genesis chapter 18, Abraham is traveling. Abraham himself is an immigrant, and he finds refuge in places where he travels. Like if Abraham was in the United States today and God called him on a mission, him and Sarah called them both on a mission to journey to a new land, the US would kick him out. We would call him an illegal immigrant. Thank God that that was not the policy in the ancient world. Abraham was able to travel and he found hospitality in the nations that he traveled to. Abraham, as he's traveling out in the desert, he himself looks up and sees three men standing nearby. And Abraham says to them, "Oh my gosh, you're strangers. You're clearly out to get me. And I must hide and protect myself from you because we know that you're a criminal because you're a stranger." No, he doesn't say that. What he says instead is, "Hey, come on over and let me feed you. Wash your feet here. This is a safe place for you." Right? He doesn't have a mentality that these people are evil enemies out to get him. In fact, he welcomes the stranger because that's what our faith calls us to do. In Leviticus chapter 19, 33 to 34, it says, "When a foreigner resides among you in your land, do not mistreat them. The foreigner residing among you must be treated as your native born. Love them as you love yourself, for you were foreigners in Egypt. I am the Lord your God." The impetus here is to empathize with foreigners. Because what? You were once foreigners in the land of Egypt. You know what it is like to be a foreigner, to be a stranger in a strange land. You know what it's like to be an immigrant. And when they were foreigners in Egypt, they were treated harshly. They were slaves. God says, don't do that. Don't do that to the foreigners among you. You must treat them as the native born. I'm just telling you these things as biblical values, as Christian values of how to treat the stranger. Exodus says the same thing. Do not oppress the foreigner, for you yourselves know how it feels to be foreigners because you were foreigners in Egypt. This is the mercy that Bishop Budde is calling our politicians to live into when it comes to foreigners here in the United States. Deuteronomy chapter 10 says that God defends the cause of the fatherless and the widow and loves the foreigner residing among you. God loves the foreigner residing among you. What does that mean? That means you should too. That means you should too. Isaiah 10. I wanted to highlight this because the prophets, as I mentioned earlier, rise up during times when politicians fail to live out their divine mandate, which is not to hoard more wealth for themselves, but to care for the most vulnerable among them. So Isaiah chapter 10 says this: "Ah, you who make iniquitous decrees." Those are the political leaders of Israel at the time. "Ah, you who make iniquitous decrees, who write oppressive statutes to turn aside the needy from justice, and to rob the poor of my people of their right, that widows may be your spoil, and that you may make orphans your prey." Widows and orphans are kind of the catch-all phrase for the most vulnerable among us. Isaiah says that, threw the paper down. I'll grab it again. Isaiah says that you turn aside the needy from justice. The needy is anybody in need, including foreigners, including immigrants in our midst. You turn them away. Isaiah says, don't do that. That's not your job as a political leader. This is what Bishop Budde is in line with the biblical prophets here. Turning to the New Testament, and this is really it. This is what I'm wanting to focus on, is that in the Gospels, especially in the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus has this phrase, and he's quoting the prophet Hosea. Jesus says that God desires mercy and not sacrifice. And he says it in the midst of religious leaders who accuse him and others of not following the law. And Jesus doesn't say, actually, you're interpreting the law wrong. No, Jesus says it's far more important for you to show mercy to people than for you to sacrifice people because of the law. So the first time Jesus does this is in Matthew chapter 9, where he's sitting with tax collectors and sinners, and he's eating with them. And the Pharisees come and they say, "Why is your teacher eating with tax collectors and sinners?" And Jesus says, "Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice." Jesus is associating with people who are bad, that our religious text says, hey, those are not people you're supposed to associate with. You might get guilt by association, right? Jesus here reverses that. He reverses that whole religious dynamic, guilt by association. No, Jesus is here to love everyone, especially those that the religious leaders, political leaders accuse and scapegoat. That's where you will find Jesus in this world. Why? Because Jesus desires mercy and not sacrifice. The second time he quotes this is in Matthew chapter 12, where he and some of his disciples are plucking heads of grain on the Sabbath. And the religious leaders come to him and says, hey, you and your disciples are doing what's not lawful on the Sabbath. Jesus doesn't say to them, you are interpreting that law incorrectly. Actually, it's perfectly fine for us, according to the law, to pick on the Sabbath. No, he doesn't say that. In fact, what he says is that, yeah, well, King David did it. King David broke the law, right? There is precedent for breaking this law. Why? Because the law of compassion is more important. The law of mercy is more important than any law that would lead us to sacrifice others. So Jesus says, go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. So Bishop Budde is fully in line with the biblical prophets. She's fully in line with Jesus. She is doing one of the things that I think is so important for us to do, which is reclaim Christianity, because we are seeing two forms of Christianity emerge, and we've been seeing it for quite a while. One is framed around mercy. The other is framed around sacrifice. There's a merciful Christianity. There's a sacrificial Christianity. Jesus says, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. I mean, when we've got people who are basically funding Donald Trump's campaign and now have this made up position, Doge, in his cabinet, may have his own office in the White House, going around giving Nazi salutes twice. You know that this is sacrificial. Like this, we are We are on the precipice of sacrificial Christianity. Bishop Budde is calling that out. She's naming it, and she didn't do it intentionally. She was naming merciful Christianity. She was naming mercy, and the sacrificial Christianity strikes back. So Jesus says, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. Matthew chapter 25, verses 31 through 40 is also critical in this conversation. Why? Because here Jesus says that at the end of time, the nations will come to him and they will be judged. The nations will come and they will be judged by how they treated the poor in their midst, the vulnerable in the midst. All the nations shall be gathered before him, Matthew 25 says, and the king will say to those on his right hand, come, you that are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. I was naked and you gave me clothing. I was sick and you took care of me. This is merciful Christianity that Jesus is talking about. And the nations will be judged by it. National systems, political systems will be judged by how well they lived into this vision of caring for all people, including the stranger in their midst. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. Jesus here for Christians is saying that he is, if you're looking for Jesus in the world, he is in the most vulnerable. That's what Matthew chapter 25 is saying. I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. Where are you going to find Jesus in this world? In the most vulnerable, in the stranger, in the immigrant. And what we do to the immigrant and the stranger, we're doing to Jesus. That's what Jesus is saying. Now, some people, some sacrificial forms of Christianity says that Jesus isn't talking about everybody. It's just people who are Christians, because Jesus says, just as you did it to the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me. So they'll find ways to try to limit what Jesus is talking about here. But that's false. Jesus isn't talking about members of his family that are in his little religion. The members of Jesus's family are the vulnerable and the marginalized in our world. Those are the least of these. Those are the members of Jesus's family. So here we are. One final one. Hebrews chapter 13, verse 2 says this. Hebrews is a letter in the New Testament, by the way. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing so, some people have entertained angels without knowing it. This is a reference back to Abraham that we started off with, Abraham and Sarah, who showed hospitalities to strangers. And those strangers are angels. Why? Because all of the strangers in our midst are angels, deserving to be treated with the holiness that they are. That's one of the things that Bishop Budde did that was so important, was talk about the sacredness of being human. Genesis chapter 1 says that God created humans in the image of God. In the image of God, God created them. This is like the foundational ethical principle of the Bible. All people are created in the image of God. All people have this sacredness to them and should be treated as such. The closest thing to God that you have in this world is the image in your fellow human beings, is the image in Trump, is the image in our immigrant neighbors, undocumented immigrant neighbors. How do we treat everybody, even those that we call our enemies, as if they had the image of God in them? Sometimes it means creating boundaries for people. Sometimes it means rising up like Bishop Budde did in a way that uh, advocates for the most vulnerable among us. And she was so humble. She was so, like, as I said before, almost timid in doing this. To say that she wasn't gracious and that she was nasty in it is, I think, to miss the point. So, uh, main thesis of this episode is that Bishop Buddy is exposing American Christianity and giving us two options. Jesus says, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. Those are our options. We live into a merciful Christianity for everybody, or sacrificial religion. I don't even want to call it Christianity, a sacrificial religion that doesn't look anything like Jesus Christ, but looks like sacrificing others, including the most vulnerable among us, because it gives certain people a sense of power. It's pathetic. It's pathetic. So, all right. So let's get to some comments. That was my half-hour screed. Thank you for listening. Kenton, good to see you. Yeah, yeah. Greetings, Princess. Cheryl, yeah, she rocks. Yeah. Acts of Mercy, Cliff. Yep. Hello, Melanie. Ellen says, sharing, thank you for discussing Bishop Buddy and pressing her name message forward. She's, yeah, the Bishop of Washington, D.C. I'm glad that she took the opportunity to do that because, as I said before, it would have been clergy malpractice not to. So, Cliff says the ones who keep our overpriced foods from rotting in the fields. Yeah, in Georgia a couple of years ago, you can Google this and find it. Articles on it in Georgia, and I think they also did this in Florida. They actually tried to uh, to send undocumented immigrants away, and all of the crops in the field rotted. Now, that tells you something about the American economy, that we rely on undocumented immigrants to do this work that nobody else will do, and the unjust system of all of that, because we're paying them much cheaper wages than we would anybody else. If we were a more just system, we would be advocating for undocumented immigrants to be paid a just wage. That would be biblical justice in the United States. But yeah, Cliff, I mean, that's what the farmers. There was a farmer on CNN who was interviewed. Do you think Trump is serious about sending undocumented immigrants away? Oh no, no, he wouldn't do that. It would destroy our economy. Cliff, that's what you're getting at. Yeah. Melanie, ICE arrested about 150 immigrants yesterday whose only crime was being in this country illegally. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that's the part of the injustice of the American system, is that our economy demands undocumented immigrants to come and work. Even, Trump hired them for his businesses, and here he is scapegoating them. The hypocrisy of it is off the charts. Uh, but yes, the unjust system in the United States, the economy demands that we have undocumented immigrants come and work for us. And then we treat them like this. ICE arrests them and sends them away. We end up scapegoating them. It's demonic. The American system is demonic. Hi, Jeff. Melanie, that may be part of the problem. Trump doesn't give one F word about the economy. That's right. Yeah, yeah. Sharon, I'm with you. She was the epitome of grace. Cliff says. I don't. Yeah, I mean, I'm with you, Cliff. Melanie says, I saw a post by a Republican official who said her sin was the sin of compassion. I saw, Melanie, I'm glad you brought that up. I just saw, as I was doing a little bit of research for this episode, a pastor from Utah tweet, do not fall for the sin of empathy, in response to Bishop Buddy. There are right-wing Christians calling empathy a sin. This, when we've gone over some of the passages in the Hebrew scriptures, when when the Bible says, it's Deuteronomy, Exodus, when they say you shall be you shall treat the stranger in your midst as if they were a native born, for you were once strangers in Egypt, and you know what it's like to be a stranger, so don't treat people that way. You shall love the stranger in your midst. That's empathy. That is a direct call for empathy. So to say that empathy or compassion, Melanie, as you're putting it here, compassion is a sin, this just shows you how sacrificial that religion has become. That, again, form of Christianity, American religion is sacrificial, and that's shown by these right wing folks who are so scandalized by a message of mercy, by the message of Christ. Cliff says her level of humility should be the goal we strive to achieve. Yeah, I have a hard time. I need to figure out some of that humility. I There's a balance, right? Like she was bold in what she did, and I think we need a bold Christianity at this time. Also, a humble Christianity at the same time. That balance of boldness and humility is something that we're going to have to walk. And I think that she walked it really well, especially in that space. Like, I would aspire to be like that, Cliff. Yeah, that's a goal we should strive for. Thank you. Uh, Caroline, I love all the gifts, etc., showing the prophet calling out the king. Yeah, yeah. I've seen some of those too. Yeah. Trump's perception of immigrants is simply a mirror of his own character. Oh, that's interesting, Jeff. I want to bring you on and have you say more about that. There is something like, the things that we hate most in other people are often the things that we hate inside of ourselves. Like, Trump's perception of immigrants is a mirror of his own character. And yeah, I wonder, like, when I'm at my most humble, thank you, Cliff. I sometimes think, is my animosity towards someone like Trump holding up a mirror to those parts of me that need to be healed? We were talking in one of our sessions earlier this week at the church about empathy for the immigrant. Yes. And is there a way that we can find some empathy for Trump? Apparently his childhood was not great, and he had to live trying to live up to the expectations of his father. And this does not justify any of his actions, right? But a childhood like that, where you constantly had to earn the love of your father, is ripe for creating someone just like Trump, a narcissist, uh, somebody who doesn't know how to handle their own inner hatred and so projects it upon others, and most likely the most vulnerable because they don't have a defender. That's what bullies do. And so, can we have empathy for everyone, including Donald Trump? Yes, but that doesn't mean that we sit back and let all of these things happen. Thank God for the judiciary system. I'm not talking about the Supreme Court, but beyond that, that is suing Trump for some of these executive orders that he's trying to do to stop them from happening. Right? I mean, pray that they work, right? And thank God that they're there doing their thing. Haley, good to see you. Pastor Adam, Reverend Marianne, Buddy, and Nadia Bowles Weber. Oh man, unity, love, and mercy. Thank you for preaching the gospel. Good news. Good news. Haley, it's good to see you. Tony says, I'm first generation Portuguese and English is my second language. I know what it is like to be ostracized and have rocks thrown at me while an adult yells, go back where you came from. It's a hurt that cuts deep. Tony, thank you for sharing that, Tony. That Uh, I just want to give you a hug. Thank you for sharing that, Tony. We're working for a day when that never happens. Jeff says Trump is doing what is evil in the sight of God. Yep, yep. And we need prophets like the biblical prophets to rise up and name that and point to a better world. Sorry, I may butcher your name, and Anik. Um, uh, but Anik, thank you for being here. Says thank you for taking the time outside of a Sunday to come to the table for your concerned followers. The Episcopal Church is well known for welcoming all, and I am proud of the church for preaching the gospel to ask for mercy. Blessed Anik names it right here. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Thank you, Anik. Elizabeth, hello to you. Tony, that happened in the 1960s. Thank you for sharing, Tony. Yeah. Elizabeth, ICE is in my town right now doing raids, and everyone is freaking out. They just left the hospital. Yeah. One of the things that I've heard from podcasters that I listen to is that Trump is likely going to send ICE raids to blue cities, to blue states, to cripple those economies, because he knows that those getting, getting rid of undocumented immigrants is going to destroy the economy. So he's going to want to destroy the blue state economies and target them, as opposed to red states where you've got farms and things. So that's pretty diabolical if that's what his plan is going to be. Raids at a hospital are some kind of hell on earth. Yep, Elizabeth, that's some evil stuff. There are sheep that think they're goats in that story. Yeah, Kenton, that's good. There are sheep that think they're goats. That's the internal reflection of a sheep that recognizes the harm that they've done, even as a sheep. There is a sense in which we're all in this human story together that is full of mercy and sacrifice. God desires mercy. There are parts of me that desire sacrifice. We're all in this. I mean, that's part of the humility I think that Cliff is getting at, right? Like, there are sheep that think they're goats because they are aware of the harm that they have caused, and hopefully the sheep are able to incorporate that and heal that in their lives, because focusing on that can lead to some deep depression. But yeah, so healing from the harm, the ways in which that we have lived into sacrificial religion is a key story. It's not just Trump and the right wing that does that. I find myself doing that too. I'm not going to project that onto any of you. That's for all of us to figure out on our own. But yeah, thank you for that, Kenton. Beautiful. Hi, Joyce. Good to see you, Tanya. Sin of empathy. What? Yes. What? What? The reason I deconstructed was so I could sin more. Specifically, the sin of empathy. That's good, Kenton. Ellen. Oh, Kenton, you've got me laughing. Ellen, the sin of empathy. They haven't read Hebrews 4:15 through 16. It's the dictionary definition of empathy applied to Jesus. All right. I read Hebrews 13:12, and Ellen, I'm going to bring up Hebrews 4:15 through 16 now. And here we go. What? Oh, there's a lot. There's a lot here. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are. There's some beautiful empathy right there. The high priest who is able to empathize with all of humanity. Ellen, excellent reference. Love it. Joyce, I didn't think his mother wanted anything to do with him either. Yeah, going back to Trump's childhood, I that's probably true too. Yeah, that's going to form someone like that. Yeah. Yes, thank you, Melanie, for posting the entire 15-minute sermon. I haven't seen all of it. I've just seen the part that is in the zeitgeist at the moment. Zoe says the sins they say people are, they always project who they really are. And the MAGA people are just so ignorant and can't digest what's right. Oh, may our eyes be opened. May the eyes of MAGA be opened to God's empathy for them, and may they live into it for all people, and may we all do the same. Yeah, Cliff, we're in good company. Tony, thank you, Pastor, for being the living person you are and showing us what God's love looks like. And we're all trying here, Tony. Thank you. Thank you, Tony. Ellen, so true. We are all easily hooked into sacrificial thinking. Thank you, Ellen, for that. Yeah. Awareness, as my therapist always says, awareness is the first key of how we get caught up into sacrificial thinking and sacrificial religion. And Jesus, and I think Bishop Marianne Budde is putting before us and exposing these two different religions, these two different orientations to us. One is the orientation that Jesus says that he desires, which is mercy. The other is the American religion of sacrifice. And may we live into mercy. May we follow Jesus and live into mercy. Friends, that's what I got for you today. So thank you for being here. We will do this again next week. And if you've got any comments, questions that we should discuss here on One Question with Pastor Adam, I'd love to bring them in. And so feel free to send them to me on social media or over on email. Would love to talk about those questions. So Raylene, we'll let Raylene have the last word here. Often it reflects what is the part of self we need to work on, but would rather deny. That's it, Raylene. Thank you for that. All right, friends, hope you have a great weekend. If you are listening on the podcast, thank you for doing so. You can listen wherever you find podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. So friends, hope you have a great rest of the day and a great weekend. And until next week, God be with you.